Welcome back to Blender for Blogs. I'm Justin, and this is a video editing series where we are using Blender to create awesome looking videos like this one for your project, your website, your blog, whatever you need it for. And this is a promo video that I did showing you everything that we're going to be covering in this series. You can check out the full promo video by clicking the link in the description if you haven't seen that yet. But this video is all about importing our original footage into Blender, as well as navigating the Blender's video sequence editor. But before I get into that, real quick, I want to go over two principles that I have when it comes to files. The first principle is have lots of space. Video and audio files can be fairly big and take up a lot of space, not to mention other files like images, project files, plus copies and iterations of each of these things. I usually set aside at least about 50 gigabytes on my computer initially, and then use around 10 to 30 gigabytes per project, depending on the type of project I'm making. And along with using your computer for storing files, you're going to want at least one or multiple SD cards for your video capture and one or multiple external hard drives for backup. The second principle that I have is never trust electronics to keep your files safe. It is very easy to lose data, whether that be a file gets corrupted or you have a device that fails, like your hard drive goes out or your computer goes out, or just software, especially working with open source software, because there can be a lot of glitches and crashes that can happen. And it is your job to back up your files. So get in the habit of backing up your files. So I do it right away and I do it often. And what I mean by that is right away after I record my initial footage, I place a copy on 3 different devices. So I have the copy that I just recorded on my SD card, then I copy that to my computer, and then I copy from my computer to my external hard drive. So I have 3 copies. And then, of course, I'm going to be editing from the copy on my computer. And if for some reason something happens to that one, I still have 2 other places that I can access that initial footage. And I also do it often, like I said. I save often and I back up often. I save many different iterations of my .blend project files, which I'll get to later in the future. And I also back up my files at least once at the end of my work session that day, if not multiple times that day. Having said that, let's get started. So when we open up Blender, we see our splash screen again, and then we see our recent video editing default that we made. Now this is from the setup video that I did. If you didn't watch the setup video, I highly recommend you do that because it goes over the way that I change Blender for different keyboard shortcuts and layouts. So you want to watch that so you won't be lost as to what I'm doing. Also, if you want to use the shortcuts and the layout that I created, but you don't want to go through the trouble of setting up on your own, you can just go to blenderfrenzy.com, and when you sign up for the cheat sheet, you also get access to a downloadable file with all of the keyboard and shortcuts all ready to go. You can just import that into Blender, and I'll probably create a video showing how to do that as well. But for now, we're just going to click this video editing default, and it brings up all of our user preferences, our properties panel, our layouts, and everything that we set up in our setup video. So the very first thing I'm going to do is save this as a different file name. So I'm going to click File and go Save As. You can also use the shortcut Shift Control S as you see here. So I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to type here B4B underscore, nope, underscore demo. You can name this whatever you want, but then I do 0101. Now I add that number at the end to keep track of my iterations, and I'll show you that a little bit later. But for now, I'm just going to hit enter. Next thing I'm going to do is import our footage because that is what the whole video is about. So while my cursor is here in the sequencer, I'm going to hit Shift A to add an element. I'm going to click Movie, navigate to my video folder, my original footage, and then I'm going to select 2 files. And you can do that by either clicking and dragging if they're all in a row, or if they're not, you can just do click and then shift click to click whichever one you want. So if I wanted these 2, I can do shift click and that will select multiple. but I don't want those. I'm going to hit A to deselect all of them. Just drag and select those. Add movie strip, and voila, we have our movie strips in here. Now my view is limited to my frame range, and my frame range right now is only frame 1 to frame 250, and that's what the sequencer is showing, and that's what the timeline down here is showing as well. So you can see 250 here. So we want to change that because I want to see all of my strips. So while my cursor, again, is in the sequencer, I'm going to hit home, and that will show me all of the strips that I have in the scene. And I'm going to use my middle mouse wheel and scroll out just a little bit so I have space on the left and the right here. The next thing I'm going to do is hit page up, and that will snap the cursor to the ends or the beginnings of the strips. So if I hit page up again, it's going to snap it to the end. And page down, snap it to the end and the beginning, and page down. So page up, page down snaps to the beginning and ends of strips. So I'm going to go all the way to the end of the very last one, because this is where I want to extend my frame range. And you can see, even though we see all of our strips now, we still only have 1 to 250 frame range. This little area right here. So we want to extend that end frame all the way to our cursor. And the quickest way to do that is having the cursor here where we want it. If we hover over our timeline and hit the letter E on the keyboard for end, and then that, as you can see, that extended that all the way to where our cursor is. And now you can see our end frame is 23,285, which is a lot more than 250. Although in our timeline we can only still see up to 250. Now to change that, just like we did it with the sequencer, if we hover our mouse cursor over the timeline and hit home, then it will show the entire frame range. And I'm going to scroll out just a little bit here too to just give me a little bit more space. I like to have that space on the sides. So as you can see that these areas here, each different area is cursor sensitive, which means that the shortcut that I'm using only applies to the area that my cursor is hovering over. So if I hit home here, it's going to fit everything in view here. And then I have to do the same thing if I want to fit everything in view over the timeline. So that is pretty much for every shortcut. Just make sure you know where your mouse cursor is. All right, so the next thing I want to do is change the order of my audio and video strips. Right now, the video strip is on the bottom. This blue strip is the video strip. This aqua color strip is the audio. And if you didn't know that, or if you forget which one is which, an easy way to tell is if you hit the N key to bring up your properties panel. And I select this one down here. You can see up here the type of strip says movie. And then if I select the one right above it, it says sound. So that's how you can tell the difference between the strips. So I'm gonna select A, or hit A on the keyboard. A toggles between select all and deselect all. So I'm gonna make sure they're all deselected. I'm gonna click this one, and then I'm gonna shift click this one, so both of these are highlighted. And then I'm going to hit G, and as I move my mouse, I don't have to click anything, but if I move my mouse, you can see that those strips follow. And then I'm going to hit Y to constrain it to the up and down, so I don't want to go left and right, just up and down. And then when I get it to where I want it, I'm going to just left click. Now, I've changed my selection mode in our setup, so left click is how I select, and that's how I would end this action. But if you haven't changed that mode by going to File, User Preferences, Input, Select with your left, the default blender is selecting with the right. Also, if I'm selecting with my left, that means I'm selecting the strips with my left. And if I'm selecting strips with my left, that means to move my cursor, I'm using the right mouse button. If you didn't change that and you still have right select, then it's the opposite. So then you would right click to select your strips and then left click to drag your cursor. But I'm going to stick with the left, save user settings. All right. So speaking of selecting things, I want to share something really important right away here. And that's there's a difference between selected and active. Now, if you don't understand this distinction, it could cause you a lot of problems in the future. So I'm going to show you what I mean. So I'm going to hit A to deselect all of them. And you can see that there is a white border around one of the strips, this one here, and that is the active strip. And the reason that's the active strip is because that's the last strip that I selected. If I start selecting other ones, you can see that white border moves to whichever one that I'm selecting. Now, if I just select one of them, then it's active and it's selected. But now if I hit Shift and select this one, now they're both selected, but this one is the active one. And then if I do the same thing down here, Shift, select, now all three of these are selected, but only this one is active. Same thing here, now all of them are selected, but only this one is active. And the reason this is important is because if they're all selected, I can manipulate them within the sequencer. And as I'm basically I just press G and now I'm dragging around. And if I wanted to cancel this action, I click the right mouse button or the one that's opposite your select button. So that's what happens with all of them selected. But the strip that's active corresponds to what shows up in the properties panel. So right now, even though all of these are selected, only the active strip shows up here. And so if I change the properties somehow here, then it's only going to change for this one. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to draw this waveform. Since we're working with the sound, I'm going to draw this waveform. Just check that. And this is going to take a few minutes depending on the file type and the file size. But then once it comes up, you can see that I've changed these properties, but it only applies to the active. It doesn't apply to this one or to any of the other strips that are selected. So if I wanted to extend this draw waveform to this one, I could just click on this one and then click draw waveform. But another way is if I click this, shift click this, make sure this one is active, since we've already got this checked, right click, go down to copy to selected. Now if I click that, it's going to copy this check mark to everything that I have selected, whether it's one of them or 5 or 10 or 15 different audio files, then all of them will then draw that waveform. And the type of footage that I'm using, Blender loads this really slowly. I'm not sure why. I don't exactly know what type it is. Oh, it's a .mov. So yeah, it just depends on the file type, the file size. All right, and so now we have our waveform drawn on both of those strips. Now, I do want to point out, so if I have both of these selected like this, and this one is active, I can actually hit Shift and then select this one to deselect it. And you can see this one is still highlighted, but this one is still active. So just be aware of that when I start changing things here, like the volume or the pitch or whatever, it's going to change this one, not the one that's highlighted or selected. It's going to be the one with the white border around it, which is the active one. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. I want to point that out now just so that, you know, down in the future, when you forget, because you're going to forget, I still forget sometimes, and it causes me some headache, and then it's like, oh, that's right, this one's not the active one. Okay, moving on, let's move these strips up a little bit. I'm going to hit A and then A again to select all of them. But before I move them, I'm going to create a little bit more space here. And in order to do that, I can just come up here to the scroll sidebar and then click this little button and click and drag up to where I see 10 there. And then with my mouse hovering over here, hit G and then Y, drag up to about 10. It doesn't have to be exact. I just want to put some more space down here because we're going to be adding some stuff down here. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is add in my external audio. So with my mouse cursor over the sequencer, I'm going to do Shift A and add sound. Navigate to my sound, double click, and you can see it added it way up here in the corner. And the reason it added over here is because this is where my cursor is. So from here, what I'm going to do is shift left arrow on your keyboard, and that snaps the cursor to the start frame, whatever frame that is. So let's say the start frame here, you can change it here. You can change your start and end frames by just clicking in here. I'm going to type 10,000, and then that changed my start frame, and you can see the start frame now is here. So if I hit shift left arrow, again on my keyboard, it will snap that to the start frame. If I hit shift right arrow, it will snap it to the end frame, whatever that is. So shift left and right arrows will snap the cursor to the start and end frames. So I'm going to change that back to 1, enter, and then shift left arrow to the start. Now we've got this highlighted already. So I'm going to hit with this highlighted and with my mouse over the sequencer, I'm going to hit Shift S, S as in Sam, to snap. So that snaps this strip to the cursor right there. Then I'm going to hit G to grab and then Y to constrain it to the up and down Y axis. So then I have my original audio here and my external audio here. And then I'm going to click Draw Waveform so that my external audio, I can see both of them so I can line them up. So before we line up the audio, let's talk a little bit about navigation, because we want to be able to navigate easily and quickly so that when we're editing, it's the most efficient way. So one of the first most basic things is if you click and hold and drag with your middle mouse button, it will pan the view. I use this all the time. Panning to move back and forth, up and down. To zoom, you can scroll with your mouse wheel, scroll out, zooms out, scroll in to zoom in. Now there are several ways to zoom. We've already seen one of them, and that's by clicking and dragging here. So if I click the ends of these scroll bars here, these little dots, I can scroll in like this. I can also do it on the bottom here, scrolling in, zooming in on a certain thing here. Let's hit home again. And another way to zoom is control and middle mouse button. So if I hit control and middle mouse button, it's going to do basically the same thing that the scroll bars do, but at the same time. So I can go left or right, or I can go up and down. So if I go in a circular motion, that's what it looks like. It's doing that both at the same time. And I use this a lot. So I'll be going in, doing things like this, moving that, maybe come over here, zoom in here, moving that, just like this. All I'm doing is hitting control, middle mouse, and holding that and dragging. Now another way to zoom is to hit Shift B, as in boy. And you see these dotted crosshairs. If I click and drag, it'll give me a window, and then it's going to zoom into that window. Shift B, drag. If I hit home again, scroll out, and if I don't hit Shift before I hit B, you can see it still looks the same, but if I do that, it's just going to select. So B is box select, but Shift B is box zoom. All right, home again. I'm also going to show you with your control and your middle mouse button, if you have your cursor over here and you want to zoom into this area, what you can do first is hit 0. 0 centers the cursor. This is really useful because when you do your control middle mouse button to zoom in, it keeps that cursor right in the center. So I can be really sloppy with the zoom, but it'll go exactly to that wherever that cursor is. Otherwise, if the cursor is not in the center and I'm trying to get it over into the center, it's like, okay, how do I get that there? I keep dragging, zooming, dragging, zooming. Okay, so easy way is to, let's say I want to zoom in on the beginning, Shift left arrow to snap that, and then 0 to make sure that that's centered, and then control middle mouse button and zoom right in. So that is how you navigate through the sequencer. All right, so now that you know that, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm not going to tell you every time that I do it. Now that you know, you're just going to have to get used to it and practice. So I'm going to come over here. Remember, this is my original audio. This is my external audio. I want to line it up. So I'm going to try to line it up the best way I can. I'm going to hit G and then just start moving my mouse over to where I think it would be the best lined up. So this looks good. I'm just going to check to see if that looks like, yeah, so that looks like that's lined up pretty good. I'm going to go a little bit closer here. See if I can line these up here. So G, and I'm not going to do it exactly on. In fact, I'm probably going to do it just before. That might be too much before. I'm not entirely sure. But let's test this out. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here, and then click over here, and press play.
3, 2, 1.
And I'm going to drag. Well, first of all, I'm still at 100% over here in my resolution, and that's making my video go a little slow. So I'm going to click that and type 25, enter. Now I don't use this slider because when I use this slider, Blender crashes usually with this big of a video. So I'm just going to click in there and just type it. I can type that, or if I wanted to go back to 100, just type 100. I found that saves me a lot of headache. So with my mouse cursor over the preview area, I'm going to scroll up so that that's all the way up there. I'm going to bring my cursor back over here with my right mouse button, hit spacebar to play.
2, 1.
Again, I've changed all of these shortcuts. So originally spacebar, or originally to play and pause, it's Alt plus A. I don't like that, so I changed it to spacebar. You can check that out in the setup video that I did. So I'm going to start this again.
3, 2, 1.
And you can see that I did this purposely. When I recorded my footage, and I highly suggest you do this if you have external audio, is you make some sort of clapping or loud sound and count down. It's just a lot easier to line up that footage here. So this is where the clap is supposed to be. So I'm going to actually drag that there. So
3, 2, 1.
Just like that. Perfect. Okay. So now that I've done that, I'm actually going to take my original footage and then hit H to hide it. So then that is not going to be heard. So I go back over here.
3, 2, 1.
See how much better that sounds? This is why I don't use my camera mic, because it is very echoey. So double H, remember I changed that to hide, and then double H is to unhide. So if I
2,
look how echoey that
1.
is. H hide, there we go.
Showtime.
Okay, so I'm going to hit home here. And what I want to do is make sure that the audio is lined up throughout the whole thing, not just at the beginning. So I'm just going to choose random places.
Teaching or something. Maybe you're teaching or something you're teaching.
Okay, that's all right.
Google searches and just any.
All right.
Did I make you check your sound? Your sound? Ha, just kidding. Familiar with Blender's video sequence editor, or VSE for short.
Okay, now you can see
the best
that right here is where our next video. So I had 2 video files that I put in. So this is where the next one started. So I had only selected this audio and hit it. I didn't hide this one.
Best techniques for quickly editing video and audio strips in Blender, cutting them, moving them, snapping them, combining, manipulating.
Okay, that's all right. Let's check
that
here.
Blender does ham. Blender does ham too. Did you know that?
I did not know that. Thank you for telling me.
So nasty bugs and problems.
So I'm just checking again,
just in the way.
Clicking through here, pressing play and pause just to make sure that the audio lines up with the video.
I'm really excited too.
And again, make sure your AV sync is on down here. If it's still on no sync, you're going to be having troubles. Make sure that's AV sync.
So strap on your boots because we're going to bootstrap this Blender Brother into some video editing goodness.
Okay, so I think that's good there. Alrighty, so I'm going to save it. So Control S brings up this dialog box. If I move my mouse away without doing anything, I have not saved it. And the way you can tell is that there's a little star or a little asterisk here, asterisk, however you say that, after Blender. And that means that Blender has not been saved since the last time you made changes to it. So the reason is because when I hit Control S, it brings up a dialog box that says Save Over. So it's asking you, are you sure you want to save over this? And then you click that to save it. And now that little star is gone, which means it has been saved properly. Okay, so next thing I want to do is come up here and click here where it says Scene and type ORIG for original and then enter. Now that's just personal preference because I'm going to be making a copy of this. But before I make a copy, I'm going to actually save it again, but I'm going to save it as. So I'm going to do Control Shift S. This is going to save it as. Now I want to stop here for a minute and explain what's happening here. So we have a B4B underscore demo underscore 0101. So here you can see this says the same thing, which means we're about to save over it. And the way you can tell is this reddish pink bar. That means that this name already exists. Now that is the only warning you're going to get. So if you're going really fast and you see that and you still click save here, it will overwrite it. It won't ask you again. It's not going to say, hey, we already have this file. Do you want to overwrite it? And then the chance to cancel. It doesn't give you a chance to cancel. This is it. But it's fairly easy to see. So if you're going slow and you're paying attention, it shouldn't be a problem. So we want to rename this, but there's a really easy way. There's two really easy ways to rename this. The first way is if you come over here and do either plus or minus. If I do minus, it's going to subtract that number. Minus, 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 minus. Or if I do plus, it's going to add to the number. Plus, 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 plus. And this is why I include a 0, 1, 0, 1 here. Because if I just click the plus, I can change to another iteration and save this as 102, and then 103, and 104, and so on. Now, an even easier way to bump that number up is just while my cursor is here, press the plus button, plus or minus, and that will change that number. And that is super useful especially for what I do, because I save in iterations. I save many different iterations. Because again, remember, never trust your electronics or your software or anything to protect your files for you. So I save in iterations, meaning I save 101, 102, 103, 104, 105 as I'm going, as I'm editing and creating my all my cuts and all my moves and whatever I'm doing. But I'll go into more detail on why I do it like that later. But I want to point out one more thing, is that if you hit the plus button while your mouse cursor is over here in this panel, it's going to do something different. It's actually going to zoom, and you can see that here. Minus, plus, it zooms. Same thing for up here. Plus, minus. So remember that cursor sensitive. So it's this area here, you have to do that in order for that to change the number. So having said that, I'm going to set it at 0102 and then hit save as Blender file, or I can just hit enter, is fine too. And now I've saved it as demo 0102. And the very last thing I'm going to do is copy this scene, do a full copy, and then name this copy cut 1, enter. And now if I click on this icon here, you can see I have original and cut 1, two different scenes, and they're two identical scenes with everything in them. And so for the next video, we're going to modify our cut 1, and this is where we're going to start to cut different things out. So I'm going to do Control S for save, click, and save that as 102. And this is where we're going to pick up in the next video where we do our first cut. So see you over there.